Welcome back to another edition of the show, folks. Midweek with Eric Smith, and my guest tonight will be James Cybulski, a longtime broadcaster, TV and radio. And James, currently working in Vancouver, has been all over the country and has essentially done it all. And I'm looking forward to this chat tonight because, he's in the mix right now, so I'm going to invite him into the conversation. I'll start right there where what I was about to say. I'll say it once he's actually on the line. And thanks, of course, to all for tuning in. James.
What's up, Smitty?
Good to see you, man. How are things?
Good to see you, too. I'm good. You know, I'll tell you this much. As much as this has been a very unique and unsettling and I think devastating time for a lot of people around the world, there's been some silver linings, I have to say. And I feel like where we are right now as a family, we've been very lucky. The West Coast has been blessed with some phenomenal weather. Not to rub it into everybody back.
That's all right. That's all right.
I've seen your videos, man. I've seen snow in the last couple of weeks. We have been swimming in the ocean already. We have been paddleboarding. We have been in shorts for the last 2 months. Life is good. I'm going to probably jinx myself saying this, but it's been a good run, buddy.
Hey, it doesn't play as well when you're on the line, but come on, shorts. You know, it was beautiful today here in Southern Ontario, at least. I don't know where other people are tuning in from, but you know, the weather is certainly starting to turn. And listen, back-to-back nights now for me having somebody on from the West Coast, because you tonight, Jody Vance last night, and I will start by saying, almost word for word what I said to Jody. I haven't gotten political here. It's more talking just about folks' careers and whatnot, but there's no denying what we're living through, what we're all living through. And from a distance, it's been impressive to see what folks in BC have been able to do and the buy-in from so many in the public to just keep each other safe, keep the public safe. And as a result, the numbers that are coming out of BC, beyond impressive compared to what we're seeing in other pockets of the country. Hey, folks are still doing their job, no doubt. And I think Canada as a whole, we're still doing a hell of a lot better than a lot of places. But kudos to the folks like yourself, your family, your friends in BC who are certainly doing their part.
Smitty, it's all me, buddy. No, you know what? I'll say this, and thank you. And I think we have been lucky. I think a lot of us still kind of play Judgy McJudgerson when, you know, somebody's walking by, oh, you're not social distancing. I think a lot of us do quietly internalize that. But I would say that we caught a break in a lot of ways. One, right before everything shut down. You know, rugby sevens were here. And for people on, you know, for people that aren't familiar with it, like the Rugby Sevens is become an intergalactic event here in Vancouver once a year on a Saturday and a Sunday. You get 40,000 people at BC Place Stadium, and you get all these countries. And I'm not the first. I fully admit, I'm not a guy who grew up as a rugby guy. I am not traditionally a rugby guy. I'm not a guy who sits there, man, I need to go watch every minute of the Rugby World Cup. But it is a great event because it's 15-minute games. But the fact is you get 80,000 people that show up to this event every year. And people dress up. They have a great time. It is a phenomenal family atmosphere. But there's 80,000 people that converge together in a giant cluster in a weekend. And in those 5 days around that, the night before the NBA shut down, there was a Canucks game. 2 other nights before that, there were Canucks games. So when you factor in with employees and fans, there's 20,000 people one night, another 20,000 people, another 20,000. There's 60,000 people going to Canucks games and another 80,000 people going to BC Place. You do the math. You're talking about close to 140,000 people in an area that's only a couple hundred meters apart. And we dodged a bullet, and I think a lot of it is because March break came late for us compared to you guys, where Ontario and Quebec, you know, we kind of had the decision made for us that once the NBA kind of stopped, everybody kind of followed suit, right? Like Rudy Gobert gets sick, and honestly, like everybody kind of went, like, pardon my language, but holy shit, it just got real, right? And so I had a lot of friends and colleagues that were all set to go fly off to whether it was Hawaii or Mexico or California, going on their spring break. And they all canceled at the last minute, or at least most of them, because they realized, well, if we go, man, what if the borders close? And the border
Yep.
did, right? Like
Yep.
honestly, like from one day to the next, things shut down. Like I remember the Western Hockey League, there was somebody from the Vancouver Giants that they were still planning to play on that weekend. And I remember messaging them saying, are you guys really going to play? And they said, yeah. And then 2 hours later, like, the Western Hockey League kind of shut down, right? It's like, I didn't want to say anything, but it was just like, well, okay, you know, and just you move on, right? And we dodged a bullet, I think, with the timing of March break that was able to kind of let schools kind of take a break. It allowed for people to kind of say, you know what, let's not travel right now. And the other thing that really helped us, honestly, Smitty, the weather. I mean, allowing people to get outside. Had we had a traditional April, I think a lot of people probably would have strangled each other just because they were all cooped up in the house. But the weather has been phenomenal to where, like, my kids have been on a trampoline nonstop, and people have been out walking their dogs. People have been gardening and yard work. And this has been pretty consistent for 2 months here. So I think it's allowed for people to breathe outside and get that space.
You know, what I found, and I'll speak personally, I can't speak on obviously anybody else's behalf. Maybe it's because of the fact that, you know, I was so close to it with the Raptors in those days that we came back from Utah. And I don't know if you know or not, but
right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was tested as well. So I got tested and did the whole swabs and everything, and ultimately came back negative. And we've since found out that, you know, whether, you know, we can sit here and argue whether I should or shouldn't have been tested. We were just going based on what the experts and the healthcare officials were telling us at the time. And I've used this term a few times, James. What I was told was, as a potential super spreader, you should be tested because of the close proximity that you had on the team playing with the players who were in the game with Gobert, and as we would find out, Donovan Mitchell as well. So then I isolated, and I stayed in the full-on isolation for 14 days in my own home because of, again, as we're learning as we go, the 5 to 14-day incubation period, and thinking, okay, well, I might be negative now, but who's to say I'm not positive in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 days? So I might as well stay in. And I think for me, and I'll admit, part of it might be fear, anxiety. Hey, I'm a hypochondriac and germaphobe on the best of days, on the worst of days, anyways. But I've driven my car like 4 times in the last 9 weeks. I have not yet been in a store. We've done grocery delivery for every single piece of food that's come into our home. I've done curbside pickup for a couple of things like Mother's Day gifts and things like that. But other than that, I've stayed in my little house, my little area. I've got the hoop in the backyard, and my son, you know, only child, he doesn't have a friend to play with, whatever. But I see, you know, some other people, they've decided to maybe let their kids out and play with some other friends, or they've opened up their home to some other people, or you see some people on the street wearing masks, some people not wearing masks, some in stores wearing masks, some not wearing masks. I just think there's so much confusion right now, and I find it hard to judge good or bad who's right or wrong, because none of us really know. So you just got to try and make the best decision for you, for your family, and hopefully for your community. But even then, what does that mean? That's I think a lot of people are just confused right now, maybe.
Well, you know, we're kind of a unique scenario because my better half, Brenda, and I, we kind of pulled the Brady Bunch a couple of years ago. So I had 2 young girls, and so she had 2 girls. So, you know, we got 6 of us in the house, and her best friends for the last 20 years live next door to us.
Okay.
And we have kind of shared a child care provider for the last few years. And so, you know, life kind of went on where we all kind of work. And I mean, when I'm working, hosting a radio show, or when I'm voicing a video game for EA Sports, it's kind of, you know, I'm shut down. Like, I can't really just stop and, you know, I mean, and I don't mean to be disrespectful for anybody on a Zoom conference or when somebody's on a work meeting, because it's not like you can really just put the phone down and go. But like when you're in the middle of a radio show, it's kind of tough to be able to help. So I'm pretty useless in the house during those hours. And so, and then Brenda's, you know, she's dealing with international conferences, working in the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, this is a busy time for her. And, you know, our neighbors next door, they have 1 daughter, and we kind of all felt collectively like, look, you know, we still need to work here, and we all still kind of need, you know, support during the hours that we're working, because we all still have to pay the bills. So we ultimately decided that our bubble is going to effectively be the 9 of us. Now, with the 9 of us, now we add our childcare provider. That's 10.
Yeah.
And then my ex-wife, there's 11, and, she's, at her house. So we alternate the kids, and we just decided, hey, look, this is what we're going to do. And then, Brenda's ex, and he's, and so all of a sudden our bubble, and we kind of realized that, like, we're talking 12 people, which is, it's a big bubble, but we kind of had to say, like, look, we got to be smart about this, because one of us doing something going rogue is going to compromise everybody. And so, right or wrong, like, if we were walking around as a group, I mean, the optics would be like, holy shit, that's a mass gathering with 12 people, right?
Yeah.
And so, we kind of hunkered down. We pretty much stayed, at our place. I mean, yes, we've gone to grocery stores and, the gloves and the mask and try to keep our space, but and washing and leaving clothes out or leaving food out in the garage, that if it can stay out for a few days, then it's going to stay out for a few days until, kind of let it subside, right? Like, there's something we've never really done before, or, wiping down food, for that matter, right? As soon as it comes in the house, like, it's just all of a sudden you're treating it like this radioactive item. So, but that was all the stuff that we factored in, like, people listening to this going, man, like, that's a huge, like, but we had to be mindful. I had to be mindful of my ex-wife's residence, and just as, Brenda had to be mindful of theirs. And then also, like, Mike and Mary next door, and Emma, and Chloe and Riel and Abby and Mac. And so we kept the bubble. And I think it's, opposite to where your son is. I feel like the one escape for our kids has been the fact that they've kind of had a community, right? Like, we've kind of had our little bubble where they've got, 4 friends effectively for each one, right? They can kind of come and go and mix and match, right? My oldest, she's got 3 years on the next one, but she still bonds, right? She'll sometimes hang out with my youngest, or she's hanging out with, Bren's oldest or the youngest, and it's just become a mix and match, and they've really bonded in this time. But we also recognize that, the optics, if we were, hanging out, and that's why we tried to, even the beach is a block away, all of us going down to the beach together, we kind of realized, like, you guys go on your own, we'll go on our own, just because the optics of all of us walking around, just, that's 9 people walking around. So try to, stay in your lane, if you will.
So what is it like for you guys going to the beach then? I mean, how busy is it? How conscious are people of the distancing at this point? And for folks watching, I promise we will get into the career stuff and all the other stories. But, I find this interesting because within our own Canadian community, obviously it's so different compared to where we live. No matter where, somebody was just commenting, hello from Saskatchewan. Whatever's going on in Saskatchewan is a hell of a lot different from what we're experiencing in Ontario versus what you're experiencing in BC.
I think, it was funny because 2 weeks ago today, the Premier of British Columbia, John Horgan, basically said, hey, we're going to start after the long weekend, getting the economy and kind of recovering in phase 2, right? And so it was a sense of opening, trying to get retail. So like pubs and restaurants, or some of them have opened up again here this week. And, when the beaches, when it got warm, it's funny, they closed. We have a regional park about a K up the road for us. And I run that probably 3-4 times a week, and for me to go up there and through there, it's probably a 7K loop. But that for me, and, I sometimes, it gets a little redundant, but at the same time, I'm complaining about running alongside the ocean. And, it's like, first world problem, man. I got mountains and an ocean right there. Like, shut up, Cybulski. You got it good. But, they shut down Easter weekend, and it was a beautiful weekend, but they shut the dike down. Like, you couldn't even run on it because they were worried about crowds. And that was a smart decision for just a few days. And, when the weather's nice, people have certainly converged. This past weekend with the May 2-4 long weekend, I think you definitely saw a lot of people at the beach. I think what you've seen here in the last little bit, Smitty, is the growth of people's bubbles. So, I've seen some neighbors, they've had some house parties. All of a sudden, like, there's 5 cars in a driveway, right? And, and you can hear hooting and hollering down the street, and just recognizing. And, and it's funny, if you walk by somebody, if you're walking the dog and you're keeping your distance, and, you know, people are pretty good about that. But it's funny where, you know, you're talking to somebody and they're like, oh, you know, we kind of decided, you know, our bubble is our family, and we included one other family, and it's like, oh yeah, that's fair. And then they just, you know, this is what we decided we were going to do, and we're committing to it. And then like 90 seconds later into that conversation, they're like, oh yeah, we were over at, you know, at Tony's the other night, and we were having a few drinks and ran into so-and-so. And it's like, okay, so your bubble is like bubbles, not just a bubble.
Yeah.
Like you're blowing bubbles, for crying out loud. So, I mean, it is what it is, but I think overwhelmingly, most people have behaved overwhelmingly well. And outside of, there were a couple of images, everybody was outraged, almost like trying to shame people when the weather got really nice 2 weekends ago after the initial announcement. The beaches were packed and people were taking pictures like, look at how crowded it is.
Right.
And the optics looked terrible, but then like you had the Parks Board saying, you know what, take a look from this overhead shot. Like, you know, people kind of had spacing with their bubbles. So we're not really going to sit there and shame people. It was actually not that bad.
Yeah, I actually just saw that image a couple of days ago. I think it was our buddy Tarzan Dan had posted it or something.
What's he doing now?
I believe he's out in Calgary. I think he's still working in radio. He's still in broadcasting. Somewhere in Alberta, I believe.
He was an institution when we were kids.
Yeah.
Man, YTV. Shout out to Tarzan, man. I watched it a lot.
Hey, well, this is a good way to segue then back into the broadcasting, okay? Because the one thing I'll say about you, I can say a bunch of things, but the cool thing with you is you have the honor, I can't think of a better word, the distinction of being one of very few guys who have worked for all of the major sports broadcasters in this country. Because, you know, it's like there's plenty that work for the Score and TSN or the Score and Sportsnet. There's very few that can say they've got the trifecta.
I think I'm trying to think who else did. The Cabbie, obviously.
Yep.
And you know what? No, I'm trying to think who else.
I don't think there's many, man.
There's not a lot. And it's funny, like there's a lot of Score guys who went over to Sportsnet. There weren't a lot from a TS that went over to TSN. You know, Sarah Orleski went from the Score to TSN. Myself. I know there's somebody, Don Landis, who was kind of director behind the scenes. But yeah, no, I'm a full-on media horse, Mitty. But it was like
no, you're staying employed. That's not a media whore. That's staying employed.
I'm hanging on here with no sports, my friend. I'm hanging on.
Now, somebody mentioned Drager, but was Drager wasn't at the Score, was he? Or am I forgetting?
No, Drager was never at the Score.
Like a guy like Sherman Hamilton, with no disrespect to Sherm wasn't a full-time guy, and I don't mean that as a knock, but he did some work at the Score, and now, of course, he does some stuff with TSN and with Sportsnet. So there are people that do it, but in terms of full-timers, it's a very, very small club. And now, correct me if I'm wrong. You're for folks that don't know, you're an Ottawa kid.
Yep.
I guess I'm fast tracking grade school, high school, whatever else, because we spent 20 minutes. We spent 20 minutes on the pandemic and the lockdown, which is fine, but I want to get to the career stuff now. Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. You started in the Ottawa area, but then it also went to Vancouver for a short time before boom back to Toronto at the Score. Do I have that correct?
I started in Ottawa, landed at the Score in Toronto.
Yep.
Was there for just under 2 years. And, you know, it was funny because I remember telling them I'd only been on the job for a few months, and I had only maybe flown on a plane once or twice at that point. And I remember saying to them, you know, if you guys ever need somebody in Vancouver, I'm your guy. Oh, are you from Vancouver? Have you been? I'm like, nope, but I'm there. And so they're like, okay, well, we'll keep it in mind. And just, I was dating a girl at the time who always wanted to move to Vancouver. And so I had all of a sudden one day out of the blue, they said, we need somebody to cover the 1999 NBA draft. And that was the Steve Francis. Do you remember the eye roll? and it was funny because everybody said, man, and I remember like as a kid seeing a shot of Vancouver go, and it was like middle of February and it was green. And I was like, oh my God, like I want to live there. Like that looks amazing. And So I get there and people are like, man, you're going to love it. The mountains and the oceans are right next to downtown. And I get there and it's like, late June, right, for the NBA draft. And all it is raining and it's gray and cloudy. And I'm like, man, those people that said that there was rain and it was all mountains and oceans, like they were full of it. Right? And then like the day I'm leaving, of course, I'm walking by the airport by this window and like, oh, there's the mountains. But I was there. They offered me a Vancouver bureau position, and I went out there in 2000 and took that and went to Vancouver for 4 years. And then right when Elliot Friedman joined Hockey Night in Canada, I was offered a position to basically go back and be senior reporter at The Score, which were huge shoes to fill. I wanted to stay in Vancouver. I loved it. I loved it here, but I just felt like I needed that challenge. And so I moved back to Toronto and I was back to The Score for 2 more years, and then TSN came calling and landed there and spent the next 10 years in Toronto, which I absolutely, I loved that city. And it took me a long time to readjust to life, being back on the West Coast, because there's such an energy to that city. And it's funny, like Vancouver's got such an energy too. I think the way I can describe it best to people is if you went 3,000 miles in another direction, whether from Toronto or Vancouver for that matter, you go 3,000 miles in the opposite direction of the respective cities, you're in another country.
Yeah.
Right? Like you go 3,000 miles south of Toronto, you are in another country. You go 3,000 miles, you're in another country. It's the same as Vancouver, right? You go 3,000 K west. I mean, look where you're landing, right? And it's the same thing as south. So it is a different way of life. But I've been very lucky to kind of experience life on both sides, and it's been pretty cool. And people have paid me to do it, so it's all right.
Well, that's the best part of all. And then not only working for all 3 of the networks, but so many different roles as well. And we'll get into that over the course of the next maybe half hour or so. But from reporting to hosting to anchoring to TV to radio, I mean, all of the different roles. And that's what I find most interesting too, is just wearing the different hats in broadcasting and getting exposed to so many different things. So let's go back then maybe to The Score, whether it be in Toronto or whether it be in Vancouver. I've talked to a lot of different guys and, had Cabby on a few weeks back, had Timmy McAuliffe on as well. It's got to be a unique and thrilling experience to help, even if you're not there for the actual launch, but to help in the infancy of a place as it's growing and as it's trying to make its mark within the landscape of the country and the industry within the country.
Yeah. Oh, it was amazing. I joined in the fall of '98. So Headline Sports at the time, as it was still known then, was still in its infancy.
Yeah.
And it was funny because it was there was like a clique or a clique of fan guys, right? So there was Elliot and Brian Spear and, group of those guys. Greg Sansoni was part of that. Like just the guys who'd all kind of worked together in the past at the Fan.
Well, it's them leaving is what opened the door for me to get a job at the Fan.
Yeah,
so,
totally, right? Yeah. It's funny how life kind of goes, right? And then there was the Sportsline guys from Global. And so Anthony Shoshone, who gave me the opportunity of a lifetime, and thank you, Anthony, wherever you may be. Dave Rutherford as well, or Simon, and then Glenn McDonald was part of that. Man. Mark Hebscher was, kind of the real first. I mean, Sansoni was kind of the original on-air talent, but, Hebsy kind of provided the initial star power that the station didn't have at the time, right? And then he kind of brought that, whoa, we know who that guy is. And but Hebsy was part of that, and a lot of guys from there. And there were all these Ottawa guys, but they were all Algonquin grads that were editors. All the guys behind the scenes, they were all Ottawa guys from Algonquin, and they were editors. And then I became the first sort of on-air that was hired from the East. And so a guy named Michael Gossack had kind of vouched for me to get a demo in, and Anthony had just taken over kind of running the ship, and we had talked, in the spring of '98, and then he was like, oh, I like your demo. I don't have anything, but I'll keep you in mind. It was like, I don't know, when you're a kid, you're like, okay, well, thanks. And you just figure, okay, then moving on. And, I'll go back to doing what I was doing, in Ottawa. And then all of a sudden get a call out of the blue, and it's like, are you ready to move? I'm like, yeah, for 35 grand. Okay. And, moved to Toronto and off you go. But it it was fun because there was such a cool energy because everybody was around the same age, like the old guys, if you will. And I mean, I say this jokingly, but like Brian Spear and Elliot were kind of the elders, if you will, of the group.
Right.
And those guys, I don't even know if they were 30 yet, right? I mean, I think Freege turns 50 this year.
Yeah, so he would have been, yeah.
Yeah, like, so, I mean, he would have been like late 20s, and that was a senior voice from an on-air standpoint, right? I mean, Greg would have been probably around that age too. Although Greg could be 60 and he would still look 20. He'd be like the Canadian version of BJ Armstrong, right? and that was like, everybody was kind of given that creativity and flexibility. You look at McAuliffe style, you look at Cabby style. I mean, I was a huge wrestling nerd then. I mean, I guess I probably still am to a degree now, but, you know, we were just allowed to be ourselves, right? I mean, Cabby was just such a character.
Yeah.
Writing, he was script writing. Like, he'd come in and write down the highlights. Okay, what are you sending in for this update at 10 o'clock? Okay, we're giving you 5 plays. He'd write it down. But, like, he was just such a goofball that he just had this energy. And everybody kind of said, just put him on the air. Give him a shot. And it was just like, okay, well, here, take this microphone and a camera and just, you know, do what you got. And that was the birth of Cabby on the street. Just as, you know, everybody needs to get their reps, Smitty. And I'm sure you can appreciate this. As an on-air, if you want to be on-air, you got to get your reps. And we were kind of the little engine that could, but that was the one thing that was provided to all of us from an on-air standpoint. We were given reps, and we were given high volume where, you know, if you were a diehard sports fan, you watched the Score, Headline Sports, and it was looped, right? It was almost like your recurring demo reel for other people in the industry. So, you know, you may not have had the volume that that Sportsnet or TSN had, but you had people, like colleagues in the industry, watched. And that's where you kind of got that initial respect, where it was like, okay, you know what, this guy's grinding.
You know, what I find unique about what you just said too is it's such a unique time in history, I suppose, in the media and in broadcasting, because I don't know if you know, feel free to disagree, but it's almost akin to right now with a lot of the podcasts or blogs that have started. And there are some fabulous podcasts and fabulous blogs and independent, you know, broadcasters, writers, whatever, that have come up, whether it be through basketball, through hockey, baseball, general sports overall. But because there are so many now, and because there is so much media attention in general, I think it's harder to maybe crack through, especially even just with PR teams and with media relations teams, allowing access, allowing that press pass, allowing you kind of into that inner sanctum and that inner circle. Whereas back then, you've got this network that, yeah, it's not as big as TSN, it's not as big as Sportsnet, but they're still given the same access. They are looked upon in some senses as the same pedestal because it's a third sports network. So here you are now getting into all the games, all the practices, getting sit-down interviews, doing features, getting access to players, and you're getting your reps, as you say, and getting your on-cams and everything else in the largest market in the country, in Toronto, not doing it off in Tuktoyaktuk or wherever else. You're not small market. You're in the big time, and that's where you say you've got the spotlight of not only fellow broadcasters and colleagues, but the executives and the people that are going to be making the decisions.
Yeah, no, and I think that there were probably a few individuals like in our group that maybe weren't ready for prime time, but we slowly kind of shaped our craft and honed our craft
Right.
here and kind of, you know, hey, there's no safety net. You're just going to kind of go out there and crash and burn some nights, and I think you kind of see that now with some, you know, young broadcasters, but that's how we all kind of started out. I think when you're looking at where, I mean, the one advantage that the Score had, I think mentally, and especially 20 years ago, you know, the Score still was considered a conventional broadcaster, right? You know, somebody showed up with a $100,000 or $250,000 camera over their shoulder to videotape you with your microphone. So it's like, you know, you're not just faking it, right?
Yeah.
You know, and a camera. And so, you know, what that looked like then and compared to now, I will say this, and you can tell you're in the NBA and you're on the beat all the time, but I felt like the NBA was kind of the first to embrace digital media further than, you know, the National Hockey League. Like, I felt like if you were a website, then it was kind of frowned upon. But working as a bureau guy, the thing that really kind of opened the doors for me was working in Vancouver. And working, you know, covering the Canucks during those West Coast Express era. And Brian Burke, who is now our colleague now, Eric, which is kind of funny, but Eric, when Berkey was kind of the president and GM of the Canucks, Brian had that gruff voice, right? But he always gave us time on the score, right? So we'd do these sit downs. We had time to air, and man, like the more Berkey talked, like honestly, our producers and our assignment desk couldn't get enough of Brian, right?
Right.
So it was like, and it was like, hey Brian, how's the weather out there? It's cold. And let me tell you, I'm not going to talk to those maggots, right? And it was just like, oh, man. And, but like my colleagues would sit there and say, oh, you really fired him up. You really got Berkey going on this one, right? And it's like, I just kind of asked him how his day was, But it really kind of had people across the country take notice as colleagues to go, man, this he's out there, he's showing up, he's asking the questions. But I think that was definitely, we were treated with respect by most PR outlets. I think there were some outlets that looked down upon you. I felt like at times the NHL, if you weren't a rights holder, you were kind of like, we'll get to you kind of thing. Right. But for the most part, like Jim LeBombard was great to us, he's
the best. Yeah.
And Jim's just the best, right? But Jim, for anybody who doesn't know, but Jim was the longtime PR director for the Toronto Raptors and now with the NBA. But man, like the access that he would give us and grant us and just, doors that would open. A lot of NHL teams were pretty good though too. And, the TV was, on game days, the score was on oftentimes. So I think you got a sense that teams, especially Canadian teams, were kind of familiar with who we are in those days.
Well, and I think clearly what helped too is, as you said, the loop. So you just, if you missed the highlight, it might have aired 1,000 times, but if you missed it at 9:30, it's still on at 12:30, and you can see it until the middle of the day when maybe some of the game day previews start coming in. That to me is, I don't know if there's a ton of money to be made in that today, just running loop after loop, because again, technology has changed to the point where I can just get on my phone and I can get on my tablet. But back then, man, it was so great to know that I could tune in at any point and watch the highlights, not saying, damn, I missed the show. How am I going to find it now? It was always there for you.
And it's funny because I think, and I don't want to speak for them, but I really think that the explosion of Jay and Dan's popularity came from that morning loop rather than their show running live late at night, right? I mean, the 2 a.m. Eastern show, 11 Pacific, I think people out west would have probably watched a little bit and would have watched, but it was more that morning loop. And especially when you look at the numbers and you go, okay, 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock, kids getting ready before school, watching those highlights. Now it's interesting because I think your point is, the idea of the repackaged highlight show. And this was something I felt I struggled with when Carolyn Cameron and I worked together doing Sportsnet Central, 4 or 5 years ago. I loved working with Carolyn. Like, I loved working with her. She's an amazing talent, and we had so much fun working together. But I always knew that, like, this is not going to be a long-term fit with us doing a morning show from Vancouver, taping last night's highlights, at midnight on the West Coast, and to say, hey, good morning, everybody, because, news starts to happen by 9 o'clock in the morning, right, in the East. And so, I think it's still affordable content and programming in today's industry from a television standpoint, but there's got to be an alternative solution here going forward. I think people want live content, and you're right. Like, highlights now can be accessed, on the web and streaming. Like, I sometimes wonder, would we be better served? And I know there's always a debate, televised radio, is that the answer? But if it's live, would you rather something alive? Would you rather live content, or would you rather something repackaged?
Yeah.
And I would say, based on all the replays for all these old school baseball and basketball and hockey games, I think the answer is people prefer live.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I think we're all just kind of getting, we're taking what we're being given right now because it's all we've got.
You get what you get. You don't get upset.
Yeah, but no doubt if we had the choice, we'd rather be watching live games right now, even if it's regular season games versus yet another replay. But what's maybe been interesting, and it's obviously horrendous that it has taken a pandemic to bring us to this point. But and listen, I'm not trying to sound like, and we're both Sportsnet guys. I don't want to sound like rah, company guy here. I'm sure that TSN folks and news folks and CBC, everybody, I'm sure they're all doing fabulous and being as creative as possible. But to speak with our company is, and I've said this on multiple occasions on this show, I'll say it to you because I know you guys are kicking ass in Vancouver as well. whether it's radio and the shows that I'm hearing now and hearing the conversations as opposed to recap last night, preview next game, X's and O's. I like the bigger picture conversations. I like the storytelling. I like the career retrospectives. I like just talking to guys like we're doing, just having conversations. That from a radio standpoint, but then also seeing the creativity that it's existing where the digital space, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, has become the television station. And the programming that Sportsnet has created, and again, obviously all the outlets are creating, the shows that are now available, the interviews that are available, the creativity that's going on within the digital space, this is almost served in an awful way it started, but served as a preview of what we've been talking about for so long. This is the next wave, the next wave, the next wave. It's all going to be on the tablets and the phones. We're here now. I mean, if we weren't before, we're here now.
Yeah, it's, you know, the idea of the watch parties, right? And
yeah.
You know, and tell me this, like you're a play-by-play guy, right? I mean, you're a sideline guy from, you know, as a reporter. You've also been a play-by-play guy. What do you think the answer is going forward for the consumer? Because if you hop on your phone and you put your head down, you can miss something, right? So what's the answer in terms of having that watch party with your buddies and, you know, trying to stay on social media and get the call and the play-by-play? Like, do you think like we are as far as we are, or do you think we're going to run a ticker of people commenting on stuff? Like, I just wonder what the future is going to look like here, because you still want your picture, you still want your screen. Although my kids, it's funny, I don't know how yours is. My kids prefer the smaller screen, like the days of maybe the giant big screen TV. I wonder if it's over, because the kids almost prefer tablets over, hey, we've got a 65-inch TV here in the living room.
Yeah.
You know what, Dad? I just want to watch the iPad.
It depends on what's being watched. You know, sports versus movies versus just some YouTube thing. I don't know that it matters, you know, but I know my kid. We just, right before I started with you, we just finished watching Black Panther for the 50th time. And that's got to be on a 65-inch screen. You know, it can't be on a little tablet. But, you know, for me, I feel like as a viewer, I'll talk as a viewer first of all, I don't want to see the busy screen. I don't mind a small ticker every once in a while that might pop up with, you know, a poll question of the broadcast of the day, whatever, and maybe once a quarter, a couple of times a half, maybe you give me a few of the best answers, or you update me on you know, who's leading in the poll, what percentages, something like that. But I don't want to get into bar here, all over the screen while I'm trying to concentrate on the game. And I think from a radio perspective, it's unique for us as well in that we're trying to find ways to engage the audience, whether it be on a live play-by-play broadcast or, for your sake, on a live talk show, engage them on multi-platforms, but also then make sure that they're paying attention to what you're saying and they're still listening, and being cognizant of the fact that a large portion of your audience is likely in their car, so maybe they can't even be multi-platformed using a tablet, a phone, whatever, because they're busy driving. So how do you involve and not exclude? It's a challenge. It's a challenge, no doubt. And to make sure you're servicing the hardcore listener as opposed to the casual or the unique listener that maybe is looking for something different, because, you know, you don't want to alienate one by trying to cater to the other.
So for people watching in the West right now, I'll use the example BC1, and for people in Ontario, I'll use CP24 as an example. But I remember when I was still at TSN years ago, I remember trying to pitch the idea or suggest the idea that what would be a great option would be, especially during the day when there's not a lot of content, to create almost a CP24 for sports. And what you could have is, you know, you almost have, because you had an all sports radio station, you have the all sports radio station in one box. You know, you can kind of have your weather and forecast, but you can have your odds, your sports odds, where
right.
Gambling is such a part of sports, whether you like it or not. And that is legitimately the future of the business. I think now we're seeing legalized gambling in America. And I think it's only a matter of time before, I mean, it should have happened here 10 years ago if it wasn't for all the House of Commons, chaos in the Senate at the time. I mean, it was essentially passed by the House of Commons, but died in the Senate. But legalized sports gambling, but you have the odds, you have your scores, you have your running tickers, you can throw a forecast in there. But then what's to say that, my thought was, especially when Bell Media and Rogers had gone in together and bought, MLSE. I thought, hey, live stream, TFC practice, live stream Raptors practice, live stream Leafs practice.
Yeah.
You could ultimately create that. All of a sudden now it's live as it happens. I mean, the greatest thing that ever happened for CP24, I thought, was Rob Ford getting into office, right? I mean, that was a ratings bonanza, because all of a sudden, that channel needed to have a reporter at City Hall all the time, because it was basically like the Donald Trump cycle locally in Toronto 10 years ago, right? There was just something moving every day. And so I think that was my thought, that, hey, look, even if it's a slow day, you create a destination, a reason for people to have it, because, oh, look, I can just see at the corner, the Raptors are practicing, the Raptors are, and even that when the cameras are open, right? Like, hey, is the ball bouncing? You never know. Oh, hey, hey, you know what? Sam Mitchell's ready to talk, or you know what? Here, Jay Triano's ready to talk, or Dwayne Casey, and here's Nick Nurse, and just, hey, we're going live, and to have everybody just send, or hey, here's the coach of TFC, and here we go. Like, it's just one thing after another, and I think to be able to that's where I think if you could create that on days that I sometimes think, and I didn't understand it then. I do now with the kids, where, those plays of the month. Every time I turn on Sportsnet, and a few years ago, it used to drive me nuts. I'm like, oh my God, like, how many times are you going to watch missed plays of the month and high plays of the month? Like, it's just like, enough. But, it's funny. Anytime it's on, like, the kids want to watch it. Like, the kids want to watch missed plays. It's just like, they just gobble it up. It's the young kids that want to watch. But I do wonder, like, do people want live, and would it be a better win in the industry now going forward, where, man, if you're on Twitter, you want to know what's going on, right? Like, if you're hopping on social media, you want to be plugged in. So, would that be the answer for television going forward, to take advantage of your multi-platforms, that you can incorporate, gambling odds that the Score did for years, and you have your forecast, but you have your live content with your radio, and you can check in with your reporters and your television element, and then you can also incorporate the live streaming, that, hey, you set up a couple of cameras in the building with the properties that you own, and stream Leafs practice, or Canucks practice for that matter, and hey, we're going into the dressing room, Travis Green's going to the podium now, let's hear from him, and here's Sheldon Keefe going, like, I don't know, like, if you're sitting there, if you're having lunch at a restaurant, you see that, you're probably curious to what's being said.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I would think the biggest obstacle you get into is, obviously, teams aren't going to want to broadcast their practices. But when the doors open, would you be able to go live for that portion? A lot of times in basketball, it might just be free throws. You're not actually seeing anything. But could you be carrying then the scrums live, have a reporter there who's kind of talking and traffic copying in between? I think what's unique about that idea, I like it, is we have pockets of it already to some extent, but we don't have one place to put it together. Like, and listen, I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch of stuff, and maybe not giving enough credit to other platforms that exist. But what are we doing right now? We're doing a live show on Instagram, but Instagram only limits it to an hour. So in 16 minutes, we're done, unless we shut it down and fire it right back up again 30 seconds later, and we get another hour. But what if we wanted to bring in somebody else right now? Like, I just saw Dave Crixton in the mix. Shout out to DK. Let's bring Dave in, my man. Yeah, let's bring him in. Oh, we can't, because you can only do 2 people on Instagram. Okay, well, why? Hey, I got more followers on Twitter. Let's do the show on Twitter. Well, Twitter doesn't allow you to have a guest on Periscope. It can only be you. So I couldn't be talking to you right now. Oh, well, why don't you jump on Zoom? Well, then I got to send folks a link, and then I got to record, because can I go live, and what platform does it exist? How about you got Twitch? Twitch is, and maybe that's where you've got the scroll bar and you've got things, but now it's like another platform that you're signing up for and asking people to go onto that thing. We need a centralized place, to your point, where it can all then feed into one spot, because there's too much. Like, it's funny to me that I'm even tweeting to folks, I'm going to be on with James Cybulski, come over to Instagram. Yeah. That's where I'll be, not here. It's too kind of discombobulated.
Well, there's just, it's where's the centralized platform? And I'll tell you what, that's what's going to happen, I think, with streaming services, right? Because now we're starting to get into an oversaturated market where, you know, Netflix has kind of been our pop culture vernacular, right? Everybody, like almost everybody I know has Netflix, but now there's Amazon Prime, and now there's Crave, and now there's Disney Plus. And then when you throw that in with Netflix, and Netflix went from being like, what, $7 a month when I started, now it's like $15 a month, and Disney's $10. So now that's $25. And Crave is, you know, I used to pay for Crave, and that's almost $20 a month. So now, you know, now we're up to $45 a month for all that. Now it's, you know, it's now you start going, oh, now we got to get the rest of cable, right? Because as a sports fan, you know, we need our stuff. And so it's all that stuff that ultimately adds up, and now you start to pick and choose. But you're right. Like, what's the end game where, you know, Twitter feels a little static at times as a platform. Instagram obviously has the visual, but yeah, I saw somebody mention that, you know, Zoom is on YouTube that you can stream, and somebody else mentioning on Facebook. I was going to say, like, at some point, this is because House Party is now something I think you can do. I think, and I believe that's through Facebook as well. So I will say this, all of a sudden in the last 2 months, I never, and this may sound very chauvinistic or very sexist on my part, I could never imagine wanting to FaceTime a buddy. Like, to visually look at it. Like, I remember Sean McCormick, who was a longtime Sportsnet anchor and at Sports Page back in Vancouver. I remember a year or two ago, one of us, I think maybe his son, dialed FaceTime instead of calling. And, you know, we're staring at each other on the camera, and it's like, why the
I don't need to see you.
Do I have to look? Like, I don't need to look at you, man. I'll talk to you, but I don't need to look at you. And if it's just like kind of that, okay, I'm looking at it right now, and you look at it, it was kind of awkward. And now, man, we do it with the family. We do it with my mom, my dad. I mean, with Brenda, I mean, she travels a lot for work. So, I mean, we have FaceTime the crap out of each other, and you learn how to overcome that. And now it's like with buddies, like you know, I'll connect with them live playing a video game with them on my PS4, or I will, you know, we'll set up like a Zoom chat now where we kind of connect and have a beer, and it's like, hey, what's up? And you kind of have this connection, and you're thinking to yourself, why the hell did I not do this like 5 years ago? All I had to do was hit click on Zoom, and that was that.
And it's still, and now I'm going to be the one that maybe sounds sexist, and I honestly don't intend to. This is my world. I'm not trying to say this about everybody. I'll be clear about that. This is my world. I can hang up on my buddy easy, and not hang up on him, but like, it's just, hey, it's done, it's over, and see you later. And whether he's even looking at the screen, all right, man, talk to you later, see you. It's my wife, and it's like all the girls are on the line together, and it's got to be like this, you know, unified thing where we're all saying goodbye at the same time, and oh my goodness, I'm like watching from behind the camera, like, really? Like, come on, just hang up the phone. Come on. All right, back to you.
I love you too.
Yeah.
I love you too. Yeah.
back to you for a second. We only got about 10 minutes left here, and I don't know how we'll jam it all in here. Right. Try and take me through going from Score to TSN to Sportsnet to, like, how, why. I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of reasons in terms of how it all went down, but try to give it to me in a little synopsis after, you know, 10 years at TSN and then jumping ship and whatever else. How did it all kind of unfold?
You know, I mean, for me, when I left the Score, I mean, that was a really big decision. And Mark Milliere, who gave me a huge opportunity at TSN and SportsCenter, who I'm, you know, very grateful for, he had offered me a job. And you know, I actually thought it was McCormick, Jennifer Hedger's husband, who was calling me. Because remember when Sportsnet and TSN were in the same building essentially years back. Yeah. And up at Agent Court, and you know, the only person there, the number was 332-5000 in those days. 416-332-5000 was like the switch line, right? And the only person who called me from there was McCormick. And so one day it's like, hey, Mark Milliere, and I'm like, yeah, F off, whatever. And like, you know, and then I think I started saying something really offhand, just thinking it's McCormick. And then he starts laughing, and the laugh, I'm like, oh, this isn't Sean. Like, oh my God, is this really Mark? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And it was, he just said, hey, look, just really quick, you know, would you be interested? And you know, the process kind of went on for about a month. And I remember calling Anthony Shoshone, who had given me my hire hired me at the Score. And I remember calling him and, you know, saying, hey, look, I'm I've got this opportunity here. What do you think? And he said, honestly, I think you should take the job. I think you're ready to go. And I don't know, what more you can do here. And, that was a really hard conversation because Anthony was almost like a father figure for so many of us. Like I bawled my eyes out on the phone, like to kind of get that blessing from C-Man in those days. And TSN was great. They gave me a ton of opportunity. The reason, I think the biggest reason why I went to Sportsnet, full disclosure, was I was doing 1050. We had launched the radio station, and I joined up in 2011, and they kind of approached me with the notion that, you're going to co-host with Michael Landsberg, and I was a huge Michael fan.
Sure.
Honestly, a guy I've admired, and to work with Michael and to fill in on OTR once was very cool. But I just admire the hell out of Michael, and just a hell of a broadcaster. And he was in, and then he had to pull out at the 11th hour, and I fully understood why. He called me to explain, but selfishly, I was like, man, this sucks. Yeah. And so, there was kind of the promise that you're going to work with Landsberg, and the show's going to be on TV, and we're going to carry it 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. So you're going to have a ton of exposure on TSN2, and it was a nice significant bump from a salary standpoint, but, it was also going up against Bob McCowan. And it was also, at a time that we didn't have any hockey rights or anything. So, it was kind of a suicide mission to start, and just everything that was kind of sold to you, next time, get it in writing, Cybulski. And, and I kind of hit a wall where I felt really frustrated, and they had wanted to move me back to the Sports Center side. And at the time I had a really young family, and I didn't like the idea of all the volatility that was kind of surrounding, like all of a sudden having this, this schedule all over the place, being here, there, and everywhere. And, I love my time and a great crew and all of it. But, an opportunity presented itself that, there had always been kind of rumblings that they were looking for an extra body at Sportsnet Pacific. And, and if that opportunity ever came up, I'd be interested. And the opportunity kind of came, and I had, talked to Scott Moore, and, I got a lot of time for Scott. Shout out to Scott. And, they made that offer, and I just kind of said, look, if I wanted to be in control to kind of dictate my future at that point in my life, where I felt like, look, if I'm going to be, as much as I love Toronto, my ex-wife was from Vancouver, and I felt like, time is currency. And if I'm going to work my rear end off all the time, then, it's easier to escape the rat race. I felt like on the West Coast, and, we can kind of just chill out and a little bit. And so we went out West, and then the business kind of turned on its head, right? I mean, not long after I came out here, it just, there was a massive, managerial shift from Guy Lawrence and Nadir Mohammed, and Guy Lawrence came in, and just the trickle down effect where Scott Woodgate, who'd been running the newsroom, was no longer there. Rob Corte kind of took over, and the direction of terms of regionalism from a Sportsnet standpoint became more of a national focus. So life changed in a hurry. And so it's funky how it kind of happens. And then they shut down production. Going through a divorce at the time with 2 young kids, moving back to Toronto felt like I struggle with the commute going into Vancouver from Delta. So, I can't even imagine what the commute would be like trying to fly Toronto to Vancouver every week. So they shut down production here, and kind of wrote it out for about a year when Rogers got the rights for Sportsnet Radio. And I actually went back to news, where I started out in the business, and I was working as a reporter covering news, and had to prove to a lot of people, it's funny how you get established, and then all of a sudden you're kind of seen as just a poop emoji rookie again, going into a newsroom and going, who does this guy think he is? Right. And I think there were definitely a lot of newsies that were kind of looking at me in that newsroom, but you kind of had to, prove that you're willing to roll up your sleeves, and you're not arrogant, and you're not above anybody. And, It was really cool. It was, and I honestly, I fell in love with doing news. What I loved, you know what? I loved the fact that you could just kind of jump into something different every day.
Right.
And that was cool. But then the opportunity kind of presented itself with going back to Sportsnet 650 and be a part of the startup. And we're coming up on almost 3 years this fall, which has been, it's been really cool. It's been cool reconnecting with you over the last few years, and man, like just the run that, like, I'll tell you what, there's been times I've definitely gone like, man, like I died watching that bat flip on the other side of the country. You know, I died watching Kawhi hit the quadruple doink into the net. I mean, you know, man, I wish I was there for that. But life's been really good the last, last 5 years been really good out here. But man, there is a couple of sports moments when the only thing that's going on out here is a rebuild from a hockey standpoint. It's like, man, why do I was there for 10 years of Mudville. The Leafs sucked. The Raptors sucked. You know, the Argos were an afterthought. You know, TFC could. I mean, I lived in Liberty Village for a while. I mean, right next to TFC Stadium, they couldn't get out of their own way. And
I'm connecting some dots here, James. You know, things are crap in Toronto. You're in Toronto. You go west. The Canucks. I'm starting to connect some dots.
I show up right after 2011. What happens? Mudville. Yeah, I'm the jinx. It's the Cybulski curse, Smitty. That's what's happened.
It's got. I have no other explanation.
Covered. Yeah, you know what? My first series, my first postseason when I moved back from Vancouver to Toronto in 2004, that was essentially the end of Pat Quinn. Right? They got to round 2. They beat Ottawa as they always did in Game 7 of round 1, and then Jeremy Roenick and the Flyers bouncing Belfour and the Leafs in round number 2, and you know the Leafs didn't see another playoff again until what, 2013?
And that turned out real well.
Yeah. Game 7. Well,
were you in town for that, by the way?
Yeah, exactly. Memory lane.
Jeez. Hey, listen, man, we're up against it. Just a couple minutes left. The last one I want to leave you with, and you got to, I guess, answer in about a minute here, roughly. All that you've done, and I kind of started with this, and I throw in a voice of a video game too, which is awesome. I think that's so cool.
It's pretty.
What have you enjoyed most? Because there's not a lot, again, that have worked on all three, but that have done so many different things as you have. If you could say, this is what I'm doing the rest of my career for the next 10, 20 years, what do you enjoy most?
Oh, boy. You know, there's so many things. You know what, man, the energy working in the Olympics in 2010 was so much fun. I think I really enjoyed being a reporter more than I did. I mean, there are some days where you're just like, okay, this is Groundhog Day, but man, the chase, you know what? I like the diversity, Smitty. I really do. I love live events. You know, live events to me is where I always wanted to be. It's where my heart was. You know, I wanted to be a play-by-play guy breaking into the business, but there were only so many gigs. So you kind of get your job as doing updates or as a news anchor or as a sportscaster or eventually a reporter or an anchor. And, you know, those jobs are just so pristine. And so the opportunity, you know, to kind of present itself a couple of years ago with Electronic Arts needing a play-by-play guy, I would love to do play-by-play, you know, if that presented itself. And it's been in an unconventional sort of way, or a way I didn't necessarily ever think would ever present itself, but to be the voice of the video game. And it's different because you're recording stitches, essentially, right? Like pockets of and snippets of the game that ultimately get patched together, that they do a wonderful job of making this old fart kind of sound cool. But that would be, I think, the ultimate you know, goal if I could. I don't know if that's even realistic, you know, at this stage, but, you know, I'd love to take a crack at play-by-play. I just, you know, being in the moment, being in the pocket, I'm sure you can probably speak to that, like just the energy to be able to do that I think that would be the dream.
Perfect ending. I think we're done here in about 30 seconds. The clock's about to pop up and count us down. James, I appreciate this, man. All the best to you and your family, your bubble. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk soon.
A section. Yeah, it's like a whole section at an arena. So, wash your hands, Smitty. You take care. Nice to catch up, man. You be safe.
All right, good seeing you.
I'm really impressed to see how well you handled yourself during a crazy time, especially when it all went down, man. I was really impressed. So you be good.
I appreciate that. Thank you, man. And thanks, everybody, watching as well.
Thanks,
I'll be back again tomorrow night. Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody.